It began with a folder Roosevelt almost ignored. A thin packet of frontline dispatches, the kind that usually reported troop movements and supply routes. But when he opened the first page, the tone was different. The sentences were stiff, hesitant, as if the writer struggled to describe what he'd just witnessed. Allied troops had overrun a site near Gotha, not a base, not a prison. Something far worse. The report avoided emotion, yet every line carried a weight that made Roosevelt slow down, rereading the same phrases twice. For months, Washington had heard fragments, rumors from refugees, vague intelligence notes, scattered testimonies. But this was the first official confirmation, and within hours more messages arrived, each darker than the last. Then came Eisenhower's personal communication, direct, urgent. He had gone to the scene himself, and what he saw forced him to send a message unlike any he had written in the war. Its final sentence made Roosevelt's aides fall silent. The world would not believe this unless it was shown, fully and plainly. Roosevelt put the papers down, removed his glasses, and leaned back. The room stilled. Everyone understood. This was no longer intelligence. This was history demanding to be faced. The second wave of reports stripped away any remaining doubt. Commanders who normally wrote in calm, clipped phrases were suddenly emotional, even shaken. They described rows of barracks filled with people who barely looked alive, mass graves dug in frozen earth, and soldiers who couldn't speak after stepping inside the camp. Eisenhower's assessment arrived next, not as strategy, but as testimony. He wrote that no written description could capture the reality, and that he had ordered journalists, congressmen, and anyone available to see the site themselves. This wasn't just evidence. It was a warning. Roosevelt read the documents twice. Aides later said he seemed to age in the span of a single hour. He asked for the original cables, the photographs, the maps. Not out of doubt, but because he understood what this meant. Once this truth left the walls of the White House, it would redefine the world's understanding of the war. For a moment, he sat completely still, hands folded, staring at the final page. Then he gave an instruction so quietly that only those closest heard it. It wasn't an order of war. It was an order of conscience, and it would decide how America would reveal the camps to the world. When Roosevelt finally spoke, his voice was steady, but everyone in the room felt the shift. He asked for the most recent field photographs and the full eyewitness transcript from Eisenhower's visit. As he scanned the images, he didn't comment, didn't look away, only tightened his grip on the edge of the desk. He understood something immediately. The world would try to deny this. Some out of fear, others out of politics, others because the truth was simply too overwhelming to confront. And if the United States didn't act now, the evidence might become just another rumor swallowed by the chaos of war's end. Roosevelt leaned forward and said that what the Allies had seen must be shown clearly, without hesitation. He wanted the documentation preserved, shared with Congress, and prepared for full publication. No euphemisms, no softening. Aides watched as his resolve hardened. This wasn't a speech moment, not a performance. It was a decision shaped by shock, grief, and a responsibility he felt personally, to ensure that no future generation could ever claim ignorance of what had happened in those camps. The president closed the folder. "Let the world see," he said. And with that, the direction of America's response was set. In the following days, Roosevelt's instruction began to move through every level of the government. Military photographers were ordered to capture everything, every building, every survivor, every grave. Film crews followed, documenting scenes that would later become some of the most haunting footage of the war. Officials in Washington received shipments of these materials almost daily. Some couldn't make it through an entire reel. Others left the screening rooms pale, shaken, unable to speak. But Roosevelt had made his position clear. The evidence must be preserved, catalogued, and prepared for public release. Eisenhower's push aligned perfectly. He continued bringing senators and journalists directly to the sites, knowing that first-hand witnesses were as essential as photographs. Roosevelt supported this fully. He wanted Americans, and the world beyond, to understand that what had been uncovered was not propaganda. It was reality in its rawest form. This wasn't just about exposing a crime. It was about preventing its erasure. Roosevelt believed that once the truth was visible, undeniable, and documented from every angle, no one, not then, not decades later, could rewrite what had happened behind those fences. Roosevelt understood that the world was standing on the edge of a new era. The war was ending, but what the Allies had uncovered demanded more than victory. It demanded memory. He called for a briefing with senior officials, not to discuss strategy, but to discuss truth. One aide later said it felt less like a meeting and more like a moral reckoning. He emphasized that the camps were not an accidental discovery. They were a system, planned, built, and maintained with intent. And if the world didn't confront that reality immediately, others might try to minimize it, distort it, or bury it under the chaos of post-war politics. The president insisted that the documentation be safeguarded as national evidence. He wanted it stored, copied, archived, and shared with allied governments. He talked about future courts, future historians, and future generations who would depend on these records to understand what had happened. But most of all, he made it clear that silence was not an option. America had to speak, and it had to speak with proof, unfiltered and unbroken. Only then could the truth withstand time. The order was simple. Do not let this fade. As the scale of the camps became undeniable, Roosevelt pushed for one more crucial step. He wanted the American public to understand why the evidence mattered, not just as proof of atrocity, but as a warning about what happens when cruelty is allowed to operate in darkness. He approved the release of selected photographs to newspapers. Stark, shocking images, unlike anything Americans had seen before. Editors hesitated, unsure whether the public could handle them. But the president's message was firm. Shielding people from the truth would only help those who sought to deny it. Across the country, reactions were immediate. Letters poured into the White House, some horrified, some disbelieving, many simply heartbroken. Roosevelt insisted that the government continue releasing verified documentation, not for sensationalism, but for accountability. He believed deeply that if citizens understood what had been discovered, they would support the efforts needed to ensure such crimes could never be repeated. The truth, once visible, would shape the conscience of a generation. And so, even as his health declined, Roosevelt remained committed to one priority above all: letting the world see, clearly and irrefutably, what the Allies had found behind those barbed wire gates. In Roosevelt's final weeks, the reports from Europe kept coming. Each new document added another layer to the picture. More survivors found, more camps exposed, more evidence gathered. The president followed all of it closely, even as his strength faded. Those around him noticed that these updates seemed to cut through his exhaustion more sharply than anything else. He spoke often about the responsibility that would fall on the post-war world. It wasn't enough, he said, to win the war militarily. The Allies had to win the truth as well. If the facts weren't protected now, if the testimonies weren't preserved, then the worst chapters of the camps might be swallowed by denial and political rewriting. Roosevelt urged his staff to accelerate preparations for a full, public record, a documentary trail that no one could dispute. He believed the liberated camps would become one of the defining proofs of the war, and that America had a duty to make that proof unbreakable. Even in private moments, he returned to the same idea, that history had reached a point where silence was as dangerous as cruelty. He wanted the world to confront what it had allowed to happen, so it would never allow it again. It was one of the last missions he pushed forward before his death. After Roosevelt's death, his directive continued forward almost untouched, a final testament to how seriously he viewed what the Allies had uncovered. When the full extent of the camps became public, when newspapers and newsreels finally showed the images he insisted on preserving, the world reacted with a shock that reshaped its moral landscape. In the months that followed, American prosecutors carried these very documents, photographs, and testimonies into the first war crimes investigations. They formed the backbone of the cases that would soon become the Nuremberg trials. Roosevelt hadn't lived to see them, but the record he demanded ensured that the truth entered courtrooms with undeniable force. Historians often say that Roosevelt understood something before most leaders did, that memory itself can be a defense. If the world saw the liberated camps clearly, if the evidence was locked into the world's conscience, then no dictator, no revisionist, no political agenda could ever erase what happened. The president's simple instruction, "Let the world see," became one of the most important decisions of his final year. It ensured that the crimes uncovered in 1945 would not vanish into rumor or myth. They would stand, documented and witnessed. And because of that, generations later, the truth still stands.